Okay, so today we're going to be talking about ride decks. We all know that Standard itself, V Standard of course, used to feel very linear, and currently the introduction of the ride deck has been one of the fresh new things that have been added to us in Overdress. In general, let's go for a quick rundown of how the ride deck works, and I'm now going to talk about one of the features of the ride deck that I don't think many people have been talking about, but I'm sure people know at least. So the ride deck is simply a deck that's separate from your main deck, in which you can keep your grade 0, starter, forerunner, whichever you choose, grade 1, grade 2 and grade 3. And it gives you the ability at the beginning of your ride phase, if you haven't got, well, it gives you the ability to discard a card and ride a card from the ride deck of the appropriate grade. You cannot ride once you've hit a grade, such as grade 3, you cannot ride a grade 3 from your ride deck. Unfortunately, I found that out the hard way when I was originally testing the game. But effectively, it prevents you getting grade stuck, it gives you a reliable ride and a ride chain that works basically 100% of the time. It sort of guarantees your grade 3 choice to continue for the rest of the game, similar to how Standard you often, had one main ride for the deck that you want to stay on until the end of the game. Unfortunately, Overdress has kept that, though with the addition of Persona riding, it doesn't quite have the same effect, as, at least you are doing something with that to gain additional benefits. And the main thing I want to talk about with the ride deck is the effect of it bringing out more skill in the game. As, once again, that's one of the things that Standard felt very linear because it had very little skill involved. It was, it was very much a start to finish straight line, very few choices. And having played quite a few games of Overdress, I quickly came to the realization that one of the reasons that I felt like there was more choice in the game was simply due to the ride deck. And the best way I could describe this to people who haven't tried Overdress yet is a few Standard decks that have captured this sort of feeling for me in the past was playing Standard Eradicators and Standard Tsukiyomi. And the reason for that we'll discuss in just a second, because the choice of what to discard every turn is actually larger than it sounds. You have to think ahead and work out what the future will likely hold, based on the matchup and your own deck's capabilities. So it's very similar to Tsukiyomi's ability to search the top 5 and add a card. So if you already have the card for your ride chain in hand, you can just pick a card of the 5 of your choice. Or with Eradicators, they have many cards that say discard a card, search for an Eradicator on place, on ride. And multiple games, having played Overdress for quite a bit now, multiple games I've regretted my discard choices to use when using the ride deck, as often they haven't been thinking too far ahead because I'm still new to the game. So I often end up discarding a resource that would be much more useful later on in the game. Much to my own disappointment later on when I realised, oh darn, I discarded the wrong thing. So in general, the balancing of resources alongside the inherently larger costs within Overdress also come together quite neatly for the skill aspect, and means it feels like a much more skillful game than Standard has so far. Already, just seeing the deck varieties and the multiple choices you're making, it feels very much more like, your costs have a lot more value, which is important because those costs are larger in a lot of cases, such as Soul Blast 2, Counter Blast 2, things we didn't really see much of in Standard and kind of was a disappointment, really. Along with the balancing of Persona rides, which means you have to keep ride targets in your hand, potentially. So, being able to read the game state and the game direction is a skill in itself in Vanguard, and that can lead to good choices and not so good choices. This inherently is part of the skill of the game, I think. A good player will be able to make choices with a high chance of success and potential future ramifications, while a bad player might make more simple choices that only work in the now but don't think ahead, and often just result in a large amount of collateral damage for themselves. This aspect of skill, I think, can often be seen when people calculate trigger chances, for example, with good players often counting the number of potential triggers their opponent has left by checking the drop zone, damage zone, and remembering how many cards they've seen in their hat go into their hand that haven't been used for guard from drive tracks. So that can be important, while a less able player might not count this and effectively stumble into a trap. Well, maybe not a trap, but they're not taking these things into account, so they usually can often overguard or underguard. Just say your opponent has 1 trigger left in the deck, they might, guard for 2 triggers, even though they didn't work it out, for example. and then choose a more risky all-out attack that leaves them more vulnerable the next turn as another example. So I think overall the skill is a video in itself that I'd like to delve into in more further videos. But yes, the choice of having to choose what to discard from hand is bigger than you think. Even with, for example, a deck like Zorga, where you think, oh, it doesn't really matter, you can just rev whatever you drop. But it can be quite important whether you drop the order, so you can then use Alchemagic, for example, or whether you keep the order in hand as a card to start the Alchemagic itself. I think in general, like I've discussed this with several other players I consider reasonably quite good, and they've agreed with me that they felt like the discard choice in the game feels like one of those things that are actually really, really large and is making a massive difference in how they feel about Overdress in general. Just that ride deck. I know we don't have a current ride deck in the standard V format or in the premium format, but I'm hoping that the ride decks do start to come to either of those formats, even though it could potentially very much break some of them in certain ways. But I think overall, if it was carefully managed with a good ban list, I think it would help to add choice to standard, for example, and it would help to add choice to premium as well. Like premium never has suffered from a lack of choice, because it has the strides, which are themselves in most cases are a choice, and effectively means that costs can be greater, and therefore there's several aspects in which that can help bring out the skill in the game, which standard really didn't do, as quite often, as I said before, there's a linear path, one-way road, straight to the ending of the game, that's almost completely based on luck, or which deck is just inherently better than the other. So, I think many thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please feel free to share this around and subscribe. We have a 500 sub goal as the current motive, so please subscribe. Yeah. Thank you very much. See you around.